to Dark Academicals, a podcast where we delve into the mythos of Dark Academia one book at a time. I'm Sarah Purnell.
And I'm Sophie Waters. And this week we're looking at The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which is our Dark Academia adjacent text for this season. Described as both philosophical fiction and decadent literature, Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray is a shining example of late Victorian Gothic. Throughout the novel, we watch the beautiful and intense protagonist struggle with his own sense of conscience and sin. Led on by the influence of his friends, Dorian finally succumbs to an insufferable ennui, and his tortured descent is made complete by his questionable choices and unforgivable actions. A read that is both cerebral and tragically romantic, Dorian Gray deserves its place on the shelf next to the best and most beguiling of classic literature. So I love The Picture of Dorian Gray. I've read it twice before, I've studied it twice before, but it was completely new to you, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm a Dorian Gray first timer.
Yeah, and you liked it.
I did like it. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was. I was really worried because of all the hype. If you can call a classic book as having hype, because it's a classic for a reason. But
but there are specific classics that have like that cult following, aren't there?
Yeah.
And I think this is definitely one of them. And for good reason.
Yes.
So I guess we should look at what makes The Picture of Dorian Gray a Dark Academia title, if it is at all. Because obviously we're looking at this title from, a slightly different angle, because it's not traditionally classed as a Dark Academia novel. It's a sensationalist novel, it's a Gothic novel. But I think there is a real connection there.
Yeah.
Which is why I volunteered it for this for the adjacent episode. So we are going to look at how it connects to the novel.
Yeah, I think that's the fun thing about these adjacent titles is they're obviously not going to be Dark Academia in the sense that we are looking at it.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Like in the same way, like The
absolutely.
Secret History is obviously Dark Academia, is the granddaddy of Dark Academia. But a title like A Picture of Dorian Gray has kind of informed a lot of literature that's come after it.
Yeah, it's a legacy kind of novel, isn't it? There are so many novels that seem to have sprung from it, that draw from it, and I think because it is that melding of genres, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I know, I've studied it twice, and both times I've studied it under kind of the lens of the Gothic, and also, I can't remember what the actual term is, but it's that, oh God. What's it called? When, there's the line of what's socially acceptable, morally acceptable, and you go over it. There's a word, and it was in the name of that module. I can't. Who knows? But my brain has melted. My apologies.
Yeah, maybe we should just make a point saying that we are currently recording this during a heat wave.
Yes, and
so our brains
have
have
to
melted.
turn the fans off. Our microphones are too sensitive. We can't have the fans on. So yeah, good luck to us, quite frankly. Right, let's get going. So our first tenet of Dark Academia that kind of underpins Dark Academia is the higher education setting, often set on campus and usually elite or exclusive in some way. And straight off the bat, that is a no.
No.
It's set in London, mostly between the homes of Dorian and his friends.
Yeah.
Mostly, isn't it? So it'll be Dorian's, Henry's, and Basil's, really.
Yeah, and then wider circle of friends, isn't it? There's a duchess that they visit quite a lot.
Oh, yeah. And the theatre.
And the theatre. There is definitely a studious element, though, to it. They're all kind of sort of exploring different kind of themes, and
yeah,
I think Dorian especially seems to be quite stuck on this kind of book that Henry gives him.
that strange French novel. I don't think it ever says what it's called or anything, does it? But it's kind of the novel that Dorian kind of blames his life on.
Yeah.
He's like, this is the book that caused my descent, into sin and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we do get a pretty extensive description of the book, don't we?
Yeah.
And how attached Dorian is to it and the ideas that it kind of gives him about how to live.
Yeah, I mean, he buys it. He buy like several copies and has them rebound in different colours so that he can pick whichever colour fits his mood at the time.
Yeah. I think that also links back to his studies of, I can never say this right, asceticism? No,
Asceticism? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I can spell it, but I can't say it. Yeah, I think it's asceticism. I really can't say it. Asceticism. Hold on.
She's a Googling.
She is. Aestheticism. Yeah. Because I think he even names that, doesn't it, as something that he is exploring, something that he buys into, and he kind of... There's that whole really long chapter where he goes on and on and on about the book and all of the things that he's basically pillaged from colonised countries, like the art and the musical
and
instruments.
The jewels, and this goes on about perfume, and it is just a whole chapter of excess.
Yeah. Under the guise of doing it for the aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting chapter. And I think that kind of links into, because our normal route through, a preoccupation with a study would be something classical. It would be Latin, Greek, literature, philosophy. Whereas I think that preoccupation is the arts.
Yeah.
And art, isn't it, in this novel? And I think that's across the board for Dorian's kind of mini society within aristocratic London.
Yeah, I think it's this kind of idea of almost like how a person can become art, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what he kind of aspires to, isn't it? And that's almost what he's doing and wishing for the portrait to take on his aging. He wants to be the art, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't want everything that's, that he sees as perfect about himself frozen in a painting that can't be used anymore.
That said, though, there is a lot of links to what we would consider classical studies. So they often reference the Greeks, they reference Shakespeare. Obviously, literature figures in quite heavily. Philosophy, there's a lot of, not necessarily ancient philosophy or the beginnings of philosophy, but they are definitely tackling some big moral and philosophical questions.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that also links back to his studying, because they are an intellectual set.
Yeah. They
spend their days reading and following whims and ordering books from abroad because they don't have a job. They don't have anything else to fill their time. So they can just run with it. And there is that intellectual vein running through all of them. Even Henry, who is kind of dismissive of a lot of the kind of insular things. He's very materialistic.
He is, but I feel like with Henry, I mean, aside from being a very interesting character, he's almost... He's struck upon a certain philosophical way of being, and that's just the line that he's going to take regardless. So basically, if it doesn't please him, it doesn't serve him. He's not about it. Yeah,
definitely. He's a fascinating character and a fantastic character, but a horrible person.
Yeah.
But we will definitely talk about Lord Henry Wotten in depth a little bit later on, because there's so much to say about Henry. So next up we have Old Gothic architecture, and this one isn't as explicit, But it's, if you know London,
Yeah,
it's written into London.
it is.
You know?
I think the only place that you get that sense of like the Gothic from the setting would be in the room where he keeps the portrait.
Yeah, the old schoolroom that hasn't
Yeah.
been touched in 5 years. It's a locked door. It's, things draped. The old furniture draped. It's where things just get shoved
Yeah.
and hidden. And it's also where he locks that part of himself off, isn't it? Like childhood Dorian. But what I find interesting, I think, is like that sense of the elevated, the Gothic, the fantastical. There's kind of a sharp point. There's this whole thing of like when Dorian travels across London, from West London to East London, where he commits his sinful acts, he kind of leaves that behind, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It's ramshackle houses and opium opium dens in the East End. It's a really stark contrast of setting under this kind of generally grimy, dark sense of London in the 1890s? Or was it the 1870s?
Well, late
1890,
1800s,
I
isn't
think.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely a dark, moody, a haunting vibe across this. Even just being with Dorian,
Yeah.
who is very insular, isn't he? Like, and the way he looks upon life, even though he's all kind of, you know, go and get his pleasure in whatever form that takes at whatever cost, there's still that undercurrent to it, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very strange framing, I find, because Dorian isn't really your focus for the first few chapters. Like, he is part of the story. He's an integral part of the story, but you're not really...
Yeah.
You're not, like, sitting on his shoulder until, like, further on in. And even then, you're very closed off as the reader, I think.
Yeah. I think that's part of, like, there's something Henry discusses about when Basil kind of tells Henry off for this new Dorian, and Henry kind of goes, no, this is the real Dorian. And I think when that kind of deal is struck and the portrait starts to take on the sin and the aging, and Dorian begins to just act on his desires and impulses with no fear of consequences, I think that's when you kind of come closer to Dorian. And I wonder if that was like a strategic thing of, you know, we're not with Dorian because that's not the real Dorian. But then even when, you know, he's acting on his basest desires, perhaps, you know, that's closer to Dorian. But is that really truly what Dorian is, or is it he just still under someone else's influence? Maybe.
I just feel like you never get like a true kind of read of what it is, other than at first he wants to stay young and beautiful forever, like he doesn't want to get old, but you never really get a sense of like what he wants out of life, like where he's going, where he's heading. But obviously because he gets so wrapped up in what's happening with him and the portrait and everything, but there's no room for... I just think sometimes there is no room for the reader in his journey.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I don't think it helps either that we skip so much of Dorian's life.
Yeah.
Because the novel starts when he's 20 and that's when he gets the portrait. And then we don't fully join Dorian again until he's 38.
No, that's true.
And by that point, he's in it, isn't he? He's addicted to opium. He visits questionable people in questionable places and resurfaces at strange times in the morning, you know. He's already at that point, and we kind of missed the bit where he discovers his desires and impulses and starts to act on them. We miss the building of his relationship with all of these people that we meet at the end. So yeah, I guess I'm saying I agree with you. We really are kept at a distance. Interesting. Something we're not distanced from. Murder!
Yeah, it's quite a brutal murder on the page.
It is. Your shocked message when you read it.
I did not see it coming at all. At all.
It's very sudden, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it
And I
also
think-
feels kind of
I think-
inevitable.
Yeah, I think so. But I think that's also like feeds into what I was saying about that kind of distance you have as a reader. Like you don't see it coming because you're just not privy to how he got where he is now.
Yeah, definitely. But it is. I think actually the worst bit for me reading it on the page is actually the descriptions of cleaning up after the murder of Basil. Because so Basil comes to Dorian's. Oh, obviously, massive spoilers. We forgot spoiler warning. Massive spoilers about this novel. I know it's only 200 years old, but over 200 years old even. But we still wouldn't want you to get spoiled for a wonderful book. So please go read it and then come back. We'll be waiting. So Basil, he's about to go to Paris and he comes to Dorian's because he wants to exhibit the portrait and also find out. He has a question to ask Dorian, doesn't he?
Doesn't he really want to know like how he stayed so young? Isn't he like just tell me? Or
Oh yeah.
Isn't that why?
Oh no, that's Henry. That's
I know
Henry.
that's Henry, isn't it?
Yeah, no, he wants to know. He's heard bad rumours about
yeah.
Dorian, and he wants to know if they're true because he can't believe that they're true of this, you know, this beautiful young boy that Basil still sees him as. And they kind of get into this discussion of like, well, if you could see my soul. And Dorian's like, well, let me show you. And then he ends up murdering him on the spot. And I think that is the darkest bit, the blackmailing to get rid of the body and the way that that's done.
I mean, it's just very like it switches to something very sinister very fast, doesn't it? When it's almost like a switch is flipped with Dorian. He's like, I'll show you. And you kind of know, don't you, from there that this is not going to go anywhere good. Definitely.
I think it's that he doesn't have inhibitions anymore.
Yeah.
He just does what he wants, and if there are consequences, he thinks about them later.
Yeah. Or in the case of like Basil, he tries very hard not to think about him. In that it even calls Basil's body a thing. Like once he's deceased, it's just the thing in the chair.
Yeah. But that's what Henry taught him at the beginning with Sybil, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in the past now, you don't have to worry about it. It's done. And it's like someone dying for the love of you is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, there is a scary logic to what Henry says about the past. Like, you can see how someone could be lured into that way of thinking, because on the one hand, it's helpful. Like, you know, if you experience something and it's like plaguing you, just leave it behind. But also there's healthier ways to do that than just shut it all off and pretend nothing happened.
Yeah. It's like in the Vampire Diaries, you remember when they used to like flick their humanity switch?
Yeah.
It's basically, he's done that. I feel like Dorian would appreciate a comparison to the Vampire Diaries. He'd be a big fan of Damon.
I reckon so, yeah.
So yeah, there is 100% murder in this.
Yeah.
There's also a suicide of Sybil.
And there's a shooting.
There is a shooting, yeah, of Sybil's brother. And an attempted murder of Dorian.
Yeah.
It's all in here. It's all there.
So, hero worship of a particular figure or author. And quite often, this is either really obvious or really not obvious. Inobvious? Not obvious.
Subtle?
Subtle. Whereas I think for Dorian Gray, especially at first, he idolises Henry. In the sense of how he lives his life, isn't he? It's all linked back to Henry.
And I think in turn, Henry comes to idolise Dorian in a way. Because Dorian has stayed so young and beautiful. And Basil is clearly obsessed with him.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
At the end with Henry, you definitely get that sense of like awe and wonder, don't you? Because
yeah,
doesn't Dorian play the piano for him or something. He does something anyway, and
He does something like that, yeah.
Yeah, utterly enthralled, isn't he?
There's definitely a lot of queer undertones with the relationship between those three.
Yeah. I mean, there's queer undertones, like, throughout the whole thing.
Throughout, yeah. Literally one of my notes is, in all caps, queer. Everyone is queer.
Yeah.
And it's subtle, but it's not subtle.
Yeah, I mean, if you lived in a world where you're very like sheltered, where you're brought up in a very conservative way, that queer culture is not a thing that you're aware of, you probably would read this and you wouldn't notice it.
You wouldn't see it.
But in 2022,
if you're open to it, and if you know, yeah, exactly. It's so obvious, especially with Basil.
Yeah.
In the beginning. Everything about the way Basil talks about Dorian, and confesses to him. It's that confession about the portrait, and he's confessing about how much, you know, he likes and respects Dorian. But it's, if you change a few words of that, and it's a very romantic confession of love.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's very, very queer coded.
Yeah. I mean, he always brings it back to like his art. So if ever questioned on it, he could be saying, "Oh, I was talking about my art. You know, my art will never be the same again without this muse."
Yeah.
But no, it's queer.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And then, I mean, even with like Dorian, even though Dorian has he falls in love with women, but never actually follows through with any kind of relationship with them. Instead, he chooses to have these kind of close, intense relationships with different men that then fall apart. And we're never really told why they fall apart. I think at one point it's just described that they start to resent him for the fact that he doesn't age, and it just feels like more like a intimate relationship breakdown rather than a friendship that's just kind of fallen by the wayside. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So our next tenet of Dark Academia is old money, which collides with new money or no money. This isn't really applicable to the Picture of Dorian Gray, but like with The Great Gatsby, there's a real focus on wealth and excess, and the privilege of that, and the freedom and the kind of ability to consume art, to consume knowledge, to consume people, really. Not in a literal way. It doesn't go that far. But it gives them permission to use people however they see fit.
Yeah. I mean, the only place that we seem to really see the the difference between, like, Dorian obviously has a lot of money, that's explained at the beginning, is usually the women that he does become involved with are poor, destitute, from backgrounds that could never like entertain the idea of a gentleman like marrying into their family. So obviously with Sybil, you see their family struggling, and then later on there's the girl, is she called Hetty? It's very brief. There's that farm girl who he kind of
in his country house.
Yeah. He had, but I think, is it Henry that says that, you know, you've ruined her for men of her station now, because
she'll always want a gentleman.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think it's a really stark comparison between when we go inside Sybil's house as well, compared to when we go inside Dorian's or Henry's or Basil's.
Yeah.
It's like everything that's kind of open to the men is kind of closed off. And even the women, the rich women, like the Duchess and stuff, although they have the money, it's still under the control of their husband.
Yeah.
And they're still very restricted.
There's always talk of their husbands. There's always talk of, like, there's that one that's like married 4 times.
Yeah. I guess that is a standard of, you know, being a woman, especially an upper class woman in 1890. But But it is an interesting comparison point there, that he deliberately avoids women of his own class.
Yeah.
I guess he wouldn't get away with it as thoroughly, would he? Because society would know about that relationship. He wouldn't be able to walk away. He would be obligated to stand by those commitments.
That's why he always seems to enter these, he protests that it, he doesn't entertain them, but he seems to enter these like almost will they won't they relationships with these married or widowed or older women of aristocracy, because it's not going to go anywhere, but he's kind of indulging in that fantasy, and I suppose that's kind of getting him into places that...
I guess that could also be part of the queer coding, though.
Yeah.
If he doesn't actually want to be in a relationship with a woman.
No. He likes the idea, he likes the beauty of
cover.
them, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He likes that's why he likes Sybil when she's acting, because she's playing romantic parts, and he likes to experience the very unreality of of what it is to love a woman. He's into it.
Yeah.
But when it comes to what the reality of being with a woman is, he's really not into it.
Like that whole scene after he goes to see Sybil, and she performs badly because she's just distracted by her love for Dorian. The way he shuts her down is
disgusting.
Unbelievably brutal. It gives me shivers every time. Because I think the scariest thing is that you could see that. Like, I don't think that's something restricted to 1890.
No.
Like, men have not improved in the last 200 years.
I was going to say,
really.
it's not unsimilar to a guy meeting someone on a dating app. They're chatting. It's all very performative at that point. They meet up and he goes, oh, well, you're not like how you are on Tinder.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because she's actually a real person.
God, it's depressing. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Okay. So, weather is a literary device. There's no weather.
I don't know. I think there is a bit of
there's
weather.
The fog.
There's the fog and the mist. I think it's a very important element to the story, because there's this whole like murkiness to what Dorian and his friends are kind of indulging in, and then the mist or the fog comes in. And I think, is it Henry who says something about the illusion of an attachment, and how it's like puts a mist over things.
That's interesting. Yeah. I guess it's also that I think most of the mist is when he's doing something naughty, isn't it, as well?
When he goes off to the East End and is
yeah,
it's foggy, isn't it? Because he can't see out the window.
He's being shielded by the mist, and by his, to extrapolate that, by his wealth, by his status, by his beauty.
Yeah. But also you could also argue that he's gone too far to see a clear path. So he can't see any other possible path.
Yeah,
he can only keep ploughing forward through that direction because he can't see any other way.
That's true. Very true.
Weather. But other than the mist and the fog and the
weather if you look hard enough.
Yeah, there's not really... It doesn't really play a part other than for the mist and the fog.
So our final tenet of Dark Academia that we're going to look at is underdeveloped social skills, or the protagonist is portrayed as an outsider. I think yes and no.
Yeah. I think we kind of... At first, with Dorian, he hasn't developed his full kind of persona yet. And he seems quite... Not necessarily timid, but... I don't know what the word is. He's not timid, but he's not quite yet realised his own potential, has he? Like what he can...
No. I mean, he's young.
Yeah.
He's very innocent.
Yeah.
At the beginning, isn't he? But I think by the end, he's kind of going to the other end that while he's still at the centre of his own teeny tiny little circle, in wider society he is an outsider then, because it says like he turns up at the club and people leave, people won't go to his parties, or he won't be invited because they know about the dodgy stuff he's getting up to. And I think that puts him on the outside, but he's still very much at the centre of, you know,
he's got too much money to be fully shunned, doesn't he? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. He's too beautiful to not.
He is. We never
to not be admired. And
interestingly, we never really hear of him kind of being pursued as a suitor. And again, I don't know if that's just part of the kind of like queer reading of it, because he's
could be,
you know, whether or not mothers kind of tried to chase him down at parties or not, or whether once we get to him at like 38, they've kind of blocked that one off because of all his dodgy dealings.
But now I've got them head, I can't help but think that maybe part of that is deliberate. The more he acts out, the more he puts off the respectable mothers, you know?
Yeah.
No one's going to want him for their daughter.
There would be someone. He's got enough money.
There's always someone. Yeah, that's true.
Who would just throw their daughter at him and say, have this one.
No, that'll do.
Yeah.
Oh, I wrote down, I've just scrolled down on my notes. You know, when you're talking about Shakespeare references, I found a really direct one. You know, after he kills Basil and he looks at the portrait and his hand turns red and sticky and dripping. Macbeth. Yeah. I was well chuffed when I made that connection. And also, I think this might be stretching a little bit, but I feel like it overturns Keats's beauty as truth and truth as beauty.
Yeah, I mean, there is kind of like that kind of exploration of of the Romantics, isn't there? And what they kind of stood for. This is almost like an antithesis to it.
Yeah, because he only retains his beauty by denying and hiding the truth of him and his situation, you know. But he also wants the kind of... He still admires everything that Keats admired, you know, in that outlook of everything is, you know, beautiful, also just like worth everything for love, kind of.
Despite how awful a lot of the characters are and how just they would not be great company to keep in the sense of what you could end up being influenced to do and stuff like that. But there's still just a small part of me that would just love to be like a late 1800s bloke, a libertine, just lots of money, lots of privilege, lots of art, lots of books.
Because there's no repercussions.
No, exactly.
For anything that they do. So why not?
I mean, I'd probably skip the murder bit. I'd probably skip the...
I mean, ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really want to be addicted to opium either.
I think I'd probably just like to be, like, melancholic and laying on a chaise-longue and reading Keats and... Yeah.
Having to flee to Italy for your health.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if I feel under the weather, I must go to Tuscany.
Just having
and then be gone for 3 months.
Yeah, really kind of close friendships.
Yeah.
With
beautiful people. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a life. Right, so I think we're going to move on to criticisms of the novel. And we've got 2 major, glaring, horrendous ones.
Yeah.
Misogyny and anti-Semitism. So, which one should we tackle first?
Well, let's go for the first on the list. Let's go for misogyny.
Lord Henry Wotten is literally one of the biggest misogynists I've read about in a very, very, very long time.
He doesn't have much good to say about women, does he, at all?
Some of it is truly shocking. Like, I mean, let's be honest, we've heard it all before, but it's still grim. And I can never decide with Henry whether partly he believes it, or the rest he's just doing it for effect and to cause a scene, or if he really genuinely does think like that, because
Yeah. It's difficult with him,
horrendous.
isn't it? Because he is an inflammatory character. Like, he loves nothing more than to walk into a room, say something really shocking, and then go, What did I say?
Just watch it fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it
He
something I said?
basically is a shit stirrer.
Yeah.
Is what he is.
Yeah.
There was a quote that I actually saved because I was like, what the hell is this? My dear boy, no woman is a genius. Women are a decorative sex. They never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. Women represent the triumph of matter over mind, just as men represent the triumph of mind over morals.
But
Makes me want to punch things.
but at least, it's not coming from Dorian, who is supposedly our like protagonist. It is coming from who is potentially the antagonist of the book.
I think you could. I mean, you could probably see Dorian as the antagonist as well.
Yeah.
He probably plays both sides, doesn't he?
He's an
Really?
anti-hero, isn't he? Yeah, he's a...
Yeah,
But-
yeah, that's a better way to describe it.
But I think it would be more worrying if we were reading that kind of perspective from Dorian. Whereas Henry...
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to excuse it. Like, it is utterly vile. But it's not coming from, like, the main, like, voice of the novel. It's coming from a character who is trying really hard to be contrary and just
Inflammatory.
and shocking for the sake of being shocking, because we see Dorian fall in love, but like become kind of enamored with several women. I don't think he ever really says anything awful about them, does he? Dorian himself.
No, I don't think so. I think the most horrible he is to a woman is when he kind of turns Sybil down.
Yeah.
But he does argue.
Actions do speak louder than words.
Yeah, in this instance they really do.
Because you also
Yeah,
you
I
do
mean-
see Henry, he is quite on the, like, he will say these awful things to Dorian, but then he's quite pleasant and open and friendly with like the hosts,
The
of
women.
somewhere. So, the women.
Yeah, that is true. But I guess he has to be, doesn't he, to keep his place.
Yeah.
There is I think it's later on in the novel, after Dorian's killed Basil, and they're sitting at a party or whatever, and Henry's like, I'm about to say something that might stop me from ever getting an invite again.
Yeah.
So he's very aware of the effect of, what he says.
I think his biggest mistake is seeing women as nothing more than what the current society has placed them as. Like, he refuses to see outside of that that box, because it doesn't serve him to see it in any other way.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's something I think the Duchess mentions that at some point, doesn't she? Something, I don't think it's as open as that, but it's kind of a hint towards, like they have a role.
Yeah.
They have a role to play. They have a box to fit in,
But then I suppose Dorian as well, like, he often describes women in a way that's not... It just it supports those stereotypes. Like, he often sees the women that he's in love with, he sees as these kind of like delicate, kind of flittering things. Like, Sybil is in her scenes is described as almost like trembling with desire for Dorian. It's really quite cringe.
It's that it's that like childlike virginal kind of ick.
This
Ick,
kind of
ick,
like
ick.
blushing bride to be, like,
Yeah.
ugh,
It's gross. I'm just trying to find the bit where Dorian slaps her down. Not literally.
Although that probably would have been less painful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just reinforces the idea that Dorian is the type of person to fall in love with an idea. Because that's essentially what he's done throughout the whole book, isn't it?
100%. And literally after she gives her speech about, it was, I can't mimic a passion that I do not feel. Because she feels that for him. He literally, he flung himself down on the sofa and turned away his face. "You have killed my love," he muttered. And I love it. It's so dramatic.
Can you imagine someone did that to you? Like, what? You've just killed mine, don't worry.
Well, the next line is, "She looked at him in wonder and laughed." So she thought it was a joke.
Good for her.
Yeah, that the second she is an actual person, he's like, "Yes, you have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. Ouch. You simply produce no effect. I loved you because you were marvellous, because you had genius and intellect, because you realised the dreams of great poets and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art."
Basically, he got a boner watching her read the words of men. We read words written by men, but as soon as she was using her own mind to say something romantic, he's like, "Ew, no."
Yeah, basically, she was a blank canvas. He projected his ideas onto, and the second she came to life, no thanks. That's a really dodgy extended metaphor. My apologies. But, yeah, it's just not good. You are shallow and stupid. My God, how mad I was to love you.
I mean, again,
So
I'm not trying to
brutal.
defend
At 16,
Henry,
no.
but at least Henry's kind of aware. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, like, Dorian's saying these things and later he regrets how he treats her. He doesn't regret what he said.
No, because he says, well, it's true.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's true. You're not supposed to say it. And it is all about art to him. Without your art, you are nothing. How little you can know of love if you say it mars your art.
And it also,
gross.
it's like, you know what I was saying about how you never really kind of get a sense of what his like life ambitions are, like his goals, even just his short-term goals. He obviously hasn't thought through what his goals would be, or like what a life would look like if he did marry Sybil. Like, he hasn't thought that through.
No, that's true. But he does say at some point, doesn't he, that he never actually proposed to her. He never told her he loved her. But
Did
do you
he?
believe him?
That sounds like gaslighting to me.
It does a bit, doesn't it? But of course, the men are going to agree, aren't they? Go, well, of course, you know. Women just get carried away with these kind of things.
Yes, of course, old sport.
Regularly.
Don't worry about the silly woman.
Regularly assume people are proposing without them saying the actual words. Happens all the time. I feel like I need to read more Oscar Wilde just to reassure myself that it wasn't Wilde's view.
Yeah.
Because I really like Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, me too.
Like, I've read a bunch of his short stories on the importance of being earnest, but I can't think about the treatment of women in those. I think I'd have to read them again with that focus in mind.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to anti-Semitism, I guess.
Yeah.
I did not remember this at all. And I don't know how, because it is awful.
Yeah. I mean,
And it's
again, I'm
so
not going to defend
on-page as
it,
well.
obviously, but it is a sign of the times of when the book was written. It doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it okay.
No.
But it does come from a time where it was totally okay to be an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Like, in society's eyes, like, that was fine.
Yeah. It's shocking, though. Don't really know what to say about it.
No. I mean, I think probably the worst and most obvious instance of it, isn't it? There's a Jewish chap who is on the door of the theatre where Sybil works, isn't it?
Yeah, the door manager. Yeah, he refers to him as the fat Jew, doesn't he?
But yeah, there is a lot of
Yeah.
like anti-Semitism. There's a lot of kind of where the characters are act very distastefully, to put it nicely, towards people of colour.
Yes, definitely.
I think the only if you can even call it a positive, because I think it's just a neutral comment, is when I think there's like mention of some of the artwork that has come from what Moors have done or created.
Yeah. Doesn't he say about how, he took some of, the art and the musical instruments that had kind of survived Western civilization,
Yeah.
kind of encroaching on them and stuff like that. But he is very appreciative of their art. But again, that doesn't really say anything about how he would have treated the actual artists or musicians. Yeah, it's very icky, honestly. I didn't know it was like a historical thing in that period. Was there like a specific, like, was it situational, or was it just generalised?
I think
anti-Semitism.
I think it was
and
just
racism?
generalised. It was just like I think it just went hand in hand with the Industrial kind of Revolution and how a lot of like Jewish business owners were doing a lot better than their counterparts.
Okay.
So yeah,
Standard
and obviously
jealousy and
and that just kept building and building until it comes to a head in the late 1930s. So gross.
God, so gross,
unacceptable, and not a fan.
Yeah, I just can't believe that I've studied it twice and that isn't something I remember it being discussed.
Does that say more about the institutions that you studied at, or
possibly, yeah? Because even in like a discussion that's not, it's like around the Gothic, it should still come up. It should still have been brought up. You know?
I mean, I studied The Merchant of Venice and The Jew of Malta, and obviously with title like that you can't not kind of discuss the handling of Jewish culture and Jewish people, but it's something I think that is peppered throughout a lot of kind of classical and more well-known texts, but it's just not always necessarily the first thing that people point out.
I feel like I need to go back, look at my notes now and have a look. I found them when I was looking for my desk fan.
But then, I mean, I also not even sure. I mean, to us now, like things like the misogyny is like clear as day. But I think if you were just like casually reading the book, you'd probably notice it. But unless you were kind of already tuned in to it, would you necessarily? It's a bit like the queer coding thing. If you weren't already kind of aware and tuned into it, would you notice it?
Maybe, yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like you should be aware of it and you should be looking for those things. At the same time, God, you shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
in 2022. Yeah, so those are two major things that knocks this book from a 5-star to a 4-star for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Could have done without those.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have impacted the story at all to have taken those out.
No, it's not necessary, is it?
No.
Could have discussed the position of women and how women are used in the plot without being misogynist.
Yeah.
And didn't have to be anti-Semitic.
That's very true.
Basically. Especially, it's not even a major character. It's just a passing character. There's no need for it. Not that there ever is, but
no,
it wasn't part of the plot. I mean, it's not. It's not a plot
doesn't
point,
carry. No, exactly. It doesn't carry the plot forward. You know, if he was Jewish or not, it just
exactly.
Yeah,
it's just disgusting. I think it's time for some character analysis. For Lord Henry Wotten.
Lord Henry Wotten. Yeah.
he's our victim.
Very, well, I say jokingly. I was sort of joking at the time when I messaged you, and I was like, Henry's the devil. Then I was like, hang on a minute. Henry might actually be the devil in this
He
book.
might actually be, yeah. He is the devil leading Dorian into hell, into sin, into the, the dark of the East End. It's a literal descent. Because I wrote about this topic for my my first essay of my master's was on Dorian Gray and Dorian's descent. And it is a literal descent. The East End is physically lower than the West End, geographically. It is a literal descent. And it's Henry that leads him that way. And it is described as this hellish, dark, sinful place, isn't it? So you were absolutely bang on the money, I think.
And I think it's just in the way that he acts, and like we said earlier, how he's very suggestive and very persuasive, and he'll kind of plant an idea, and he's almost gleeful when something that he's said has stuck. He's like, oh, that's what you've decided to go with. Okay, we like that. We can work with that. And then he'll run with it until it's kind of like taken root of itself, or someone will say to him, that was really shocking what you said. And Henry will go, oh, me? What did I say? Like, he kind of like...
just playing with
or like just kind of shrugs off all kind of responsibility and knowledge of ever having put an idea into someone's head. I mean, the amount of people that he picks up along the way, or like potentially you see him in a scene and he'll say something or he'll present an idea, and every time I think it's to hook Dorian more than anyone, but somebody will say, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that sometime. You'll have to come over at some point. And it's like, how many other people has Henry kind of even just led astray a little bit with his ideas?
So many. I think that's quite a common portrayal of the devil in that period of literature, isn't it? That, like, the devil in disguise.
Yeah.
Oh, the temptation to sing the song. But we're not going to do that. I think it's quite written into, like, Victorian literature, isn't it?
Yeah.
That being led into sin and that unsuspecting person. It's just quite unusual for it to be a man.
That's true.
It's usually a woman.
Yeah.
Which, gives the novel a great standing point to be horrifically sexist. So I guess Wilde gets points on that one.
Yeah. I think he's such a clever character, because he's
a wonderful character.
Even as you're reading him and he's awful and he's terrible, but he's also very alluring even to the reader.
Yeah, he's very charismatic, isn't he? It could very easily have been Henry's novel.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I bet he's got some stories. And that would have been an interesting perspective, actually, on what kind of he did to Dorian.
Yeah, and others. It would almost be like, to me, it would be almost like, the song Sympathy for the Devil, and how it kind of like is describing all the things that he's persuaded or things that he's kind of been responsible for, but he wasn't really, he just kind of, suggested, and it would be a bit like that, wouldn't it? Yeah,
that'd be interesting. I think that'd kind of clash like the Gothic novel with like a confessional novel. That would be very interesting.
If anyone wants to write that would be great.
Yeah, I would love to read that. You've got 2 instant readers here. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the Picture of Dorian Gray?
I don't think so. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I listened to it on audiobook because I was a very busy bee, so 2 birds with 1 stone. But the narration, who is it does the narration? It is top notch.
Russell Tovey.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Russell Tovey. It is brilliant. The voice for Henry and Basil, absolute perfection.
Yeah.
See, I read half and I listened to half. And if you have an Audible subscription, it's free as part of your membership as well, which is a great bonus. It's a weirdly long audiobook for how short the book is.
Yeah, I think I listened to it on like 1.25.
I listened to it on 1.4. Because I usually listen on 1.3. So I had to crank it up.
Yeah, I listened to it at 1.25
fantastic.
and I didn't really notice. I didn't notice that it was like faster because I think it's very dramatized, isn't it? The reading of it is, it's great.
It's fantastic. I think Russell Tovey, I don't know if you remember that old show about the ghost, the witch and the vampire that lived together.
Oh, yeah.
In like the early 2010s. I think he's the werewolf, isn't he?
Oh, don't know. Google.
Now I'm like, did I make that up? Or... Being Human. It is him. He was also in The History Boys.
There you go. Piece
Love
of
that movie.
Russell Tovey trivia for you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Freebie.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I suppose we should talk about what we're going to be doing next time.
Yes. So, our 5th? Is it our 5th? Are we nearly at the end of the season already?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, our 5th and second to last book of season 2 is going to be The Mary Shelley Club by Goldie Modavsky.
When it comes to horror movies, the rules are clear. Avoid abandoned buildings, warehouses and cabins at all times. Stay together. Don't split up, not even just to check something out. If there's a murderer on the loose, do not make out with anyone. If only surviving in real life were this easy. New girl Rachel Chavez turns to horror movies for comfort, preferring stabby serial killers and homicidal dolls to the bored rich kids of Manhattan prep, and to certain memories she'd prefer to keep buried. Then Rachel is recruited by the Mary Shelley Club, a mysterious society of students who orchestrate fear tests, elaborate pranks inspired by urban legends and movie tropes. At first, Rachel embraces the power that comes with reckless pranking. But as the fear tests escalate, the competition turns deadly, and it's clear Rachel is playing a game she can't afford to lose.
It sounds so fun.
It does sound fun.
I have reservations because the first book of, Goldie Modavsky's first book and the first book I read of hers, Kill the Boy Band. No, Kill the Boy Band. The balls had nothing to do with it. Had some serious fat phobia.
Yeah.
Like, real bad fat phobia. And I haven't read anything of hers since. Even though they all sound so fun. And her writing is fun. But it was atrocious. So, all you'd have to do is a quick Google and it would come up. It was widely discussed in the book community. And it was not good. So, I'm hesitant. Slightly annoyed I'm going to have to import the US hardback.
I know.
Because it's not available on Kindle.
No, and the
Or
paperback
audiobook.
isn't out until the 22nd of August.
Yeah, but that's my issue. So yeah, that will be our next episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening and we'd love to hear your thoughts on the Picture of Dorian Gray. And we'll speak to you next time. Bye.